Before I start talking about the performance-based learning and assessment part, just as a calibration point from an educational leader standpoint, what I like to try to hit before I start talking a little bit about theory and practice is this idea of the longevity of the work that we're about to talk about. Most people who are in education have been doing things like this for a long time, but we all know that our field is really good at changing the name on us and changing a little bit of the bullet points underneath and shifting things around. But hopefully what you'll hear from me today is if you've been working on performance assessment for any amount of time, if you've been thinking about competency-based learning and high-quality project-based learning, or even just thinking about connecting careers to school, you've probably been doing forms of this work for a really long time. We try to make sure that teachers know that when we're doing training with them, that leaders see that as well. So when we say performance-based learning and assessment, I'm going to kind of calibrate what those terms mean to defined. But ultimately what we're talking about is students solving realistic real-world problems. We want them to be doing work in school that looks like what they'll be doing when they leave school, whether that's while they're still children and they're operating outside of the school building, or after they've graduated and they're out in the world. So what we're really talking about with everything that we'll talk about in the next minute or two is applying knowledge and skills to authentic situations. And when we do that, what that allows is for students to demonstrate a set of skills that they ultimately can't do really well unless they're framed by authentic situations. And those are things like evaluating the reliability and validity of sources in the context of a problem, analyzing evidence and even deciding which evidence is important to solve a problem, synthesizing lots of different bits of information that weren't provided to them in this nice, neat package by a teacher, but rather looks a lot more like what information looks like in the world. And then ultimately putting them into a position to draw conclusions, that they are the decision maker, that they're deciding what to do with that information. And it's not choose A or choose B. There's a variety of different approaches and probably more right ways than wrong ways to do it, as long as they're linked back to that evidence and those sources and other pieces. And then lastly, we're teaching them to construct their responses. How are they actually going to tell about that learning process? Both because they're communicating to stakeholders and authentic audiences, but also because their teacher needs to know what's going on in their minds in order to assess the quality of the learning. So ultimately, defined learning uses a framework called HQPBL, or high quality PBL, to design around. Our platform is designed around it, our training is designed around it, the things that teachers encounter inside the platform are designed around it. We like this framework because it's a consortium framework. It was based on a whole bunch of different people who talk about PBL coming together and saying, okay, you have 7 elements and you have 3 and you have 9, but what are our common things that we can agree on? So in high quality PBL, there are 6 elements that we really lean into. The first one being intellectual challenge and accomplishment. Sounds like the work of teaching all the time, differentiating for student needs, making sure everybody has what they need. Yes, true. Also, in high quality PBL, every learner has a challenge. Nobody comes into the project and thinks, oh, I got this, I already know how to do it. And nobody thinks that's impossible, I'll never be able to do it. So we're trying to hit that sweet spot between challenge and accomplishment, which means some students who usually soar through school with very little friction might find PBL a little challenging, and some students who consistently struggle with the traditional ways we do school could shine in this environment. So it's an equalizer for all the kids in the class. Sometimes not easy for students socially and emotionally to take on that challenge. So one of the ways that we make sure that they're willing, ready, and able is by making sure that they're in an authentic situation. If the problem feels real or even is real, they're more likely to persevere when things get difficult. Another thing that we can do to make that better is the third element, public product. Almost everything that kids do in school, I know it's what they did in my classroom, had an audience of one person, me. And so kids would follow me around and they'd say, is this right? Did I do this well? And it would drive me crazy. Why can't they be more independent and decide what it is? When you position the product as public, this is who matters. That doesn't happen quite as much in a project environment. The kids are starting to say, will my audience care about this? Is this responding to the needs of the person I'm presenting to? And it puts the teacher in this really great kind of setup of coach. I'm here to help you meet your goal versus being your evaluator of whether or not this is good. You're going to decide if it's good, and your audience is going to decide if it's good, and I'm your coach to get you there. And that's what we're using the standards for. So public product is kind of magical in HQPBL because it shifts a lot of things that are typical challenges or problems. The last three on that bottom row are things that happen during a project. Collaboration is really important in high quality PBL. We often think about kids working in groups, but students tell us that when they're working in a group where they don't need to be in a group, where they could do it themselves, they get frustrated. So HQPBL provides an interdependent framework for the team to be working together. Students start to learn then, how can I make something better because I'm working with others than if I was working alone? How can I accomplish more than I could do by myself in this time frame because I'm delegating to other people? It's meaningful collaboration that really matters. Similarly, project management is about helping the students to understand what went into the planning of this. What's the next step I need to take? How long will this take? Where are my resources going to be saved? Because oftentimes those decisions are made by teachers and really structured for students. We want them increasingly to take on those decisions so that they're prepared when they need to be more independent in post-secondary education or out on the workforce. A classic example of this is my 5th grade son's, I would say probably 80% of the files saved in his Google Drive are called untitled document. Somebody needs to help him understand, and sometimes that's me, sometimes it's his teacher, how to save things and place them into folders strategically, because in middle school, he probably is gonna need to do that, and finding what he needs in 82 untitled documents is not gonna be an efficient way to manage his projects. The last element, the most important, the one that is the highest skill students can gain from high quality PBL is reflection. We want to make sure that they're talking about the learning before, during, and after the task, all the way through, giving us a window into their thinking, because in project-based learning, project is actually not the most important thing. It's the process with which the students are moving through the task. And reflection gives us a little bit of a window into what they're thinking so we can record their learning. So hopefully as anybody in your sphere hears about HQPBL, they think, that's something I do, or that's something that I could do easily, and it doesn't even have to be in the context of a project. But these are the main goals we're trying to highlight as we move through in the framework. After that, the next piece is containing HQPBL theory in a bucket, which we'll call a performance task. It's the thing that holds the HQPBL. So Defined Learning leans really heavily on the work of Understanding by Design, Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe. I think Grant Wiggins is even a New Yorker, so you all can claim a little piece of this. But the performance task is just the thing that holds that learning. It's the ability to demonstrate the learning, yield a tangible product that we can look at, this artifact that says, yes, the artifact is something important, but it's the learning that that artifact represents that's really the most important thing. A lot of standards can only be assessed at this level, so we need that. We always use the same framework for our performance tasks inside Defined, also based on the work of Wiggins and McTighe. This originally was a design protocol, but now we turn this over to students and let them know in the task, this is your goal. This is your role, and you're taking on the role of an authentic career-based audience. Your audience is somebody real, and they're counting on you to do a good job. Your situation is an authentic, real situation that you actually care about, and it's aligned to what you're learning in class. The products and performances you prepare are things that people actually do in the world, and you're going to be doing it just like them. And then the standards by which your work will be judged are clearly defined in the rubric, so students look at that and they know exactly what's expected of them. So when we say standards here, we don't mean ELA 9.3.6. Kids don't know what that means. It doesn't mean anything to them. We say, here's what quality looks like. Quality content, process, and product. And that's going to be clear to them at the beginning of the task and then throughout. So as kind of a wind up of that, there's a lot of different theory and practice here, but there are also some really practical ways that we do this with students. We make sure that the students know what they know. You're putting their content into a real world situation. They're using processes like collaboration and project management to get there. Their products are something real. And we can show that growth over time inside of our rubrics that assess all three of those pieces, formatively, or checking in with them from time to time, or summatively, which hopefully by the time we get there in a project is just making sure. We already have lots of evidence of the kids' progress, and the final rubric is really just a way to communicate the results of that instead of being a really heavy weighted, I hope they get all the parts they need into the project. When we keep those things in mind, we can focus on transfer, and that's going to be what's important. The task itself is really important, great, wonderful. Kids have a great experience. But what they can take with them from that task into future learning is where higher order thinking skills are going to develop, because they're going to say, I learned something really important about myself and as a communicator, and now I'm going to take that skill and I'm going to bring it with me. And that might be because I did it really poorly and now I'm going to do it better next time. And it might be because I tried something and it really worked and I want to remember that and put it in a future situation. So when we teach the kids through a task where there's kind of this launch sequence, really exciting, they're going to research and learn about the task and the content, then they're going to create something to show what they know, and then they're going to share and present it. They are moving through this process within a task, but they also can do that again in the next task, and whatever lessons they've learned in each of those buckets can come with them. So we can think about how to structure that practically. The second image you see here with the anchor activity is a way to show teachers how a task can sit above cycles of learning. There's lots of practical ways we can do that. We can combine the theory of PBL and problem-based learning and project and performance tasks and assessments with what they already know in ways that can make this really work in their classroom. So the last thing that I'll share with you here is the idea of theory and reality is often a pretty wide gap for teachers. We tell them, here's what we mean when we say performance learning. We want kids to be doing X, Y, and Z. And then the reality of kids being absent and technology challenges and different levels of understanding across and new curriculum and all the things that happen can sometimes make that theory feel really impossible. The beauty of Defined and the reason that I lean on it over and over again is because it bridges the gap between theory and reality. There's practical solutions to trying to make it so that we're incorporating what's actually happening in schools and classrooms with what we're aspiring to do. We're not perfect. We're not getting it amazing. It's not always going to be ideal, but we're closer from reality to that theory. That's what Defined is really positioned as.